This is my video essay comparing 3 horror movies: Psycho, Scream, and Halloween. The most obvious comparison between these 3 movies is that they are all categorized as slasher films. Wikipedia defines slasher movies as a subgenre of horror films involving a killer stalking and murdering a group of people, usually by use of bladed or sharp tools. As you'll see, between these 3 movies, this does stay consistent. However, each movie is very different in their execution. Pun intended. So I think the best place to start would be with the killers. We have quite the lineup. Let's begin with Psycho. The killer in Psycho is named Norman Bates. He tells his main victim, Marion Crane, that he lives with his mother, and the two of them run a hotel that isn't very lucrative. Norman can almost be perceived as a victim for most of the movie, suffering abuse from his mother, and since he doesn't really have a direction in his life, he just seems kind of stuck covering up all of his mother's messes. This is until we learn something from the sheriff's wife that changes everything.
Norman Bates's mother has been dead and buried in Green Lawn Cemetery for the past 10 years.
So, if it's not his mom, who could it be? Norman Bates. Turns out he had some weird version of multiple personality disorder, where whenever he liked a girl, it made the mom part of his brain jealous, and that personality would kill them, leaving the regular Norman to cover it up. The whole time, Norman seems to fully believe his mother was alive. An interesting thing about Norman is that he never comes across as a villain. I remember watching this movie and it crossed my mind that he was the killer, but I found it so hard to believe because he just didn't give off the killer vibe. He's awkward and shy and sweet-natured, and this was a deliberate choice by Alfred Hitchcock. When he casted Anthony Perkins, he said, "I suddenly saw a tender, vulnerable young man you could feel sorry for." Another interesting thing about Norman Bates is he only killed 2 people. When most people think of slashers, they think half of the city getting murdered, but the people killed in Psycho were very specific and intentional. Scream's killer is a little different. For starters, Scream actually had 2 killers, Billy Loomis and Stu Macher. While we don't know much about Stu other than him going to the same school as everyone and being Billy's friend, we do know a lot about Billy, as he's Sidney's boyfriend. The twist reveal of the killers falls into 2 common tropes. 1, that there's been 2 killers the whole time, and 2, revealing the killer as someone close to the protagonist. Scream did a great job with this reveal by doing everything possible to keep the audience from suspecting it. They even tried to make the audience think of him as a red herring by arresting him and declaring him innocent earlier in the movie. Another unique thing about these killers is that they're in high school, whereas with the other 2 killers, they're both adults. But in this movie, it's just 2 high schoolers who grab a knife and kill just to see how it feels. And that could happen to anyone. Scream had a few more deaths than Psycho. There were about 7 killed in this movie, obviously not including characters like Dewey and Randy who had fake-out kills. Halloween's killer is Michael Myers, which I'm sure everybody watching knew that. Unlike the other 2 movies, the identity of the killer was never hidden. We knew that the killer was Michael Myers pretty much immediately. His sister even said his name before he killed her. Even so, Michael still maintains an air of mystery throughout the movie. He doesn't say a word the entire movie, and everything we know about him comes from other people. All we really know is what Samuel Loomis says.
The blackest eyes, the devil's eyes.
Michael Myers' kill count, like the other 2, stays in the single digits for this movie, totaling 5 kills throughout the movie. The main perspective in Psycho is different because it switches halfway through. The movie starts following Marion Crane. She makes a choice to steal money, then she drives all the way to the Bates Motel. But then she dies halfway through the movie in one of the most iconic scenes in the history of horror. Marion is a unique horror protagonist in the way that she's not 100% innocent like a lot of horror protagonists are, especially when they're female. But she stole money and ran away. After Marion dies, the main protagonist shifts to her sister, Lila, as she desperately tries to locate her missing sister. This movie follows her journey as she puts the pieces together on where her sister went. This character shows a unique perspective that we don't see very often in horror. Instead of the point of view of the helpless victim, we see the point of view of the people whose lives are affected forever from these types of crimes. Sidney Prescott is, in my opinion, the ultimate final girl. Unlike the other two movies, this protagonist has a direct connection with the killer. Billy's her boyfriend, someone she trusted, and Stu's her classmate, someone she thought she knew. This adds to the sense of betrayal for Sidney as she watched someone she thought was trying to protect her attempt to murder her. Neve Campbell's performance made this movie. Of course, Scream had an amazing cast overall, but Neve Campbell's interpretation of Sidney was just different from other final girls at the time, and her performance was so real and sincere when other final girls at that point, well, I'll let her explain it.
No, it's just what's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
Scream revolutionized the horror genre by showing the audience that horror didn't always have to be cheesy. It could have great production and great acting, and that was thanks in part to Neve Campbell. Our last final girl is Laurie Strode. She's the classic familiar final girl stereotype. She's a smart girl with a bright future who's spending Halloween babysitting. She notices this weird guy in a mask following her, and eventually, when her friends seem to disappear, she finally realizes that creepy guy in a mask was a little more than just creepy. Jamie Lee Curtis is a big name in 70s to 80s horror, and I can definitely see why. Her performance was great, her fear and determination felt really real, and her performance alone is what added suspense to this film. All three of these movies changed horror in some way. When Psycho came out in 1960, horror was hardly a genre. Since modern horror began in the 1960s, Psycho was considered to be one of the first modern horror movies. This movie was sensational at the time, specifically because it challenged many of Hollywood's taboos around sex and violence. I know it's hard to imagine Hollywood ever having a problem with sex and violence, but back then, it wasn't considered appropriate to put these things on the big screen. The dominating genres at the time were comedy and romantic dramas, but Psycho challenged that, and whether you're for it or against it, Psycho started the revolution that led to the Hollywood we know today. And to narrow in on the horror genre, not only was it one of the first, but it's continuing to influence the genre to this day, sometimes in tropes and sometimes in cinematography and sound design. Scream revolutionized the horror genre. It came at a time when horror was in a rut. They were all the same, they were all cheesy, and horror just wasn't a very respected genre for most of America. Of course, people did like horror, and movies like Halloween did push horror into the public eye, but horror had more of a cult following than a general audience. Scream changed that. With its amazing writing, production, acting, and practical effects, Wes Craven created a film people couldn't help but respect. This movie was also helped by the fact that it was so self-aware. There were constant references to pop culture, and with all of their references to the horror genre specifically, they were able to almost make fun of themselves while still making something incredible. They also created a great opportunity for marketing with the iconic Scream mask, which everyone knows whether they've seen the movie or not. Halloween unsettled audiences. The movie depicts a picture-perfect, normal suburb in America. Everything about it was normal, except obviously Michael Myers. Nothing about this movie was impossible, except maybe Michael getting shot like 6 times and then walking away. But otherwise, this whole movie could happen, causing the effects of this movie to last long after the credits. Everyone wondered how likely it could be for a crazy killer to show up in their sleepy little town. Halloween did a great job of making a suspenseful movie while still maintaining the theme of a boring suburban town. And that is my film comparison between Psycho, Scream, and Halloween. I hope you enjoyed and learned something. Thanks for watching.